contour line drawing is pretty much what the name suggests. You're drawing the contour or the edge of the shape um, just with line. So when I'm starting a contour line drawing, I like to draw in maybe a few key contours. I might also sketch in the overall shape just to make sure that I have my proportions right. But otherwise, I'm just kind of moving intuitively, making long flowing lines, following what I perceive the shape of this object to be. I'm trying to minimize how many times I lift up my pencil and put it back down again, but keep things moving pretty fluidly. Um, if the contour is off, it's okay. I'll draw another line. Um, what you can't see right now is that my eyes are just constantly going back and forth between my object and my paper. My setup is great because I can see my object and my drawing at the same time, which is really helpful. Now, right now the drawing's looking pretty flat and I want to start adding some volume. So I'm looking at these dark areas and I'm going to add in some darker, thicker lines to give an illusion of volume. So these are suggestive of shadow. It starts to give a little bit more depth to the drawing. And you'll see that with just a few key lines, um, this drawing begins to have a little bit more three-dimensional look, whereas before it was just kind of a series of lines on paper, starting to come together as more of a form. Blind contour drawing is contour drawing with a twist, so we're not looking at the paper at all, we're only looking at the object. In this case, I find it very helpful to just never lift my pencil off the paper. That way I am always conscious of where I've been on the paper, and don't necessarily double back. So you're kind of just going to have to trust me on this. I am not looking at the drawing. I'm only looking at the object. I think you can kind of tell by how odd this drawing is starting to turn out. But I personally love blind contour drawings as a way of just really starting to loosen up my drawing style and how I'm moving across the paper. Hatching is a drawing technique where you're laying down parallel lines that are all going in the same direction. I'm going to start by just sketching in my shape, and rather than putting down some contour lines to start, I'm going to block in some value areas, so areas that are all the same gray, by just laying down a bunch of these parallel lines. To build up value, I'll go over these lines with more parallel lines. I might apply a little bit more pressure or switch up my pencil to add even more value changes, but for the most part, I'm just doing lines that are all going in the same vertical direction. You don't have to work with vertical hatching lines. You could do diagonal or horizontal, but the whole idea is that the lines are all going in the same direction, and you're using a slow buildup of these lines to create form and value changes over time. I may also add a few key contour lines to accentuate a couple areas, and that'll be it. So for cross hatching, I'm going to start my drawing in very much the same way that I did for hatching, laying down a bunch of parallel vertical lines to start this general area of value. I'm then going to switch up the direction of my lines. So the shadow, I'll put in some horizontal lines, and then I'll start adding some diagonal lines to create some darker values. These diagonal lines also add a different texture to the drawing, so these cross marks create a different visual texture. And I'm going to continue adding some lines, really switching up the direction of my cross hatching. You can be really systematic in how you're laying down your different crossed lines, or kind of random about it. One thing that I'm going to start doing is really building up in the shadow area a variety of different crossed lines so that I can create this optical line between the light and the dark areas.
Continuous form lines we can almost think about as a combination of contour lines and hatching lines. So whereas with contour, we were thinking about the exterior edge of the shape and expressing that through line, with continuous form lines, we're looking at the interior form and expressing that through a series of curved lines. So I'm going to start by just drawing in a few key contour lines to lay in the general shape, and then I'm going to start adding these curved parallel lines. So rather than doing straight vertical or horizontal, what I'm doing is almost drawing around the object, um, thinking about where the form protrudes out, and then my line kind of curves out. Where there's concavities, my line curves inwards, and both thinking about kind of the volume of the object on the x plane and the y plane, so going around vertically and going around horizontally. I'm going to express some of the value by making my lines either closer together for a darker value or further apart for a lighter value.
So for the stippling drawing, I have already laid in the outline of my drawing using pencil, but I'm going to switch over to Sharpie because I find this a more effective tool for stippling, something darker and with a more solid and noticeable point. The idea behind stippling is that you're laying down a series of dots to create the optical illusion of value and form. You can lay down dots in a random pattern or in a more organized fashion, maybe thinking about following the form of the object. But the overall idea is that the closer the dots are to one another, the darker in value this is going to optically appear. And then as dots are farther apart from one another, this is going to be a lighter value. I'm going to speed up the drawing because obviously it takes a long time to work in this way, just laying down dots next to one another. But as you can see, this drawing is developing a really nice sense of both value and form through the kind of lines that these dots are starting to create. Um, so you can get some really beautiful results in working this way.
Expressive mark making, or if we're going to be totally honest, we could also just call it scribbling, is taking a combination of all the drawing styles that we've talked about previously and being a little bit more free with each of them. Blurring the lines between what is hatching and what is cross hatching, and how do I move my pencil. When I'm drawing here, I have a variety of vertical lines. I have some just scribbled marks. I have some circular marks that maybe are contours that have broken out from the contour of the shape. I'm switching up the pencil that I'm using, so I'm using a harder lead for a lighter line, and a darker line is coming from the 6B soft pencil. Really just being more free with the movements, not trying to stick with a particular style. So I encourage you to just kind of play around with your pencils when you're working in this style and figure out what works for you.